Welcome to the Rural Recharge, a podcast of the Florida Farm Bureau Federation. Rural Recharge is a guided conversation that allows you to cut through the noise and multitude of information out there. You should be able to trust your sources, which is why we're a platform that comes straight from the source, the farmers and ranchers growing what we eat, wear, and use every day. Our guest today is Mr. Brad Phares, a Florida cattleman, a podcast host, an artist, and a general jack of all trades, an extremely talented individual. Brad is an eighth-generation Floridian and holds a law degree from St. Thomas University's School of Law. He hosts a weekly podcast called Between the Beaches that we'll link in the episode description. Be sure to subscribe and listen to his broadcast. He's an accomplished artist and poet, well known throughout the state and country. Brad, I sure appreciate you being here. I just want to say this too. The one thing that you have that's very interesting is that you have a love for agriculture. You have a love for ranching in this state, and you're able to put that through in your art as well as prose and poetry. You're a man of tremendous talents and detail, which is very fascinating. Welcome to today, and thank you for joining us.
Well, I appreciate all that, and I'm glad to be here. Been looking forward to it, and I know we're going to have some great conversation today.
Well, I appreciate it. And you have with you Miss Sam Phares. Now, Sam is certainly not new to any of us in Florida Farm Bureau. In fact, Sam is one of our field reps down in South Florida. And Sam actually has a distinction for me. It's very personal. She was my first hire at Florida Farm Bureau. And Sam, we love you. And thank you for being here today as well.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm happy to be here.
Now, Brad, tell us a little bit about your background, your heritage, and your also operation.
Sure. I'm eighth generation in the cattle business. Our family moved down very early in the 1800s, pretty much as they were trying to expand. The territory was still trying to expand settlers further down the peninsula, because early on everybody was pretty much up in the north end of the state. So we first showed up, and this is on my mom's side, I should clarify. On my maternal side is where I have such legacy in Florida. And so it's the Pierce family, and they first moved into the state and showed up on the census in 1831.
1831.
31, I forget which of the two. Anyhow, up near present-day Lake City. Back then, they called it Alligator. And basically, they had migrated south on various military land grants that were given over time. First, they moved out of North Carolina into Georgia on one of those land grants. And then at that point, John Pierce had in his will a stipulation that upon his death, the family sell that land that he had gotten there by grant, purchase cattle, and move into Florida. And so that's what brought us in here. From there, and summarizing it as best I can, they hit the military trails, which was about the only way anybody had to follow and move about other than boat. Right. Went down to Hillsborough. We're on the Alafia River there. Again, migrated later on down the Kissimmee River Valley and settled in Fort Bassinger, and eventually down into Okeechobee, but ran all of that open range. The stories that everybody has heard or is familiar with, A Land Remembered, that's basically, I won't say it was modeled on my family, but there were several families like mine that all followed that same pattern of settlement. And so that's what got us down there. And we're still ranching today on the west side of Lake Okeechobee. And it's a family operation, myself, my mom, and my two brothers. And, of course, we all have kids coming up in it and enjoy it and love it. So, we're very, very blessed to be where we're at and have the legacy that we do in the cattle business.
So do you have a tremendous amount of wealth like Saul did in The Land Remembered? Is that you own hotels and all that kind of thing and sold buzzards at one point and made all kinds of money at it?
I wish I did, but the answer is no. I'm the typical agriculturalist in Florida, where you tend to be asset rich and cash poor. So.
Well, and all the way from Alligator to Lake Okeechobee, you all have deep roots through time. 1831 in the Florida sand, that's tremendous. Now, that was on the maternal side. Is the paternal side very similar and some longevity?
Paternal side's a little different. Now, on both sides of the family, we come from the British Isles, from those Celtic regions. As you are familiar with from having read my book and whatnot, that's a big thing for me, is understanding your heritage and your history and where you come from, because so much of that dictates,
that's right,
to this day, what we do and why we do it. Most people, I think, overlook that. Most of your Scots and Irish families migrated south down the Appalachians.
right.
Some migrated westward, and that's why we still have that heavy percentage of Scots and Irish in the Rust Belt. And that's what his family did. Ended up over in corn country in Illinois. A little place called Gibson City, Illinois is where they were at. And they were all blacksmiths, farmers, that sort of thing. They got down here because years ago, my grandfather didn't go to school to be an engineer, but was almost a lay engineer.
Right,
Just
sure.
knew how to build things and make it work. And Lat Maxey sent his CFO up there to hire my grandfather to come down here and build the first juice plants around Frostproof. And basically sent him up there and told him, don't come home until you have Billy Phares with you.
Right.
He had built Stokely Van Camp factories up there for canning the corn and whatnot.
Oh, wow.
So that's how they got down here.
That's fascinating. Thank you for sharing that. That's
Sure.
interesting. Now, Sam, do you have a heritage too in Florida sands or in the United States in general?
Well, I have not researched mine as extensively as Brad, but on my dad's side of the family, they were in the dairy business. So my maiden name is Rux, and so they moved out of Alabama into South Florida, and were part of that large group of dairymen that started dairies down there. Eventually got pushed out, moved up to the Okeechobee area. But my grandmother would not move to Okeechobee. That was too rural for her. So we were in Fort Pierce in St. Lucie County, and we were in the dairy business there for quite some time. Eventually just wasn't feasible anymore. We lost my grandfather at a relatively young age. So we moved out of that business, but my mom's father, my grandfather on her side, was the vice president of Peacock Fruit and Cattle Company in St. Lucie County. So he ran over 20,000 acres of grove and cattle. And much like Brad's grandfather, he was somewhat of a layman's engineer. He built a reservoir and water recycling system for the grove there at Peacock Fruit and Cattle, and was featured in a Progressive Farmer magazine for his innovative technology. And then, and now, of course, that's present day St. Lucie West. So there's lots of people living and shopping where that ranch used to exist. So my roots for agriculture run deep. I just don't have something tangible that my family still owns in that industry, but I'm very passionate about preserving it for those that are in that industry.
That's something that both of you possess, is a passion for the preservation of that heritage, that history, a promotion of that heritage and that history, and also just a real surrounding of the story that is being lost and can be lost. But through time, through generations that y'all have had on both sides of the family, y'all have had a tremendous influence in things that have been learned. I mean, obviously a very educated group with just gifted with engineering backgrounds and roots as well. I mean, is there anything that you would provide regard to wisdom that has come from some of those generational promotions through time, 1831 or whenever it was in the 1900s coming up? Anything you'd give today that now, especially in the cattle industry, that would be wise for listeners to hear?
Yeah, I think I kind of touched on it a minute ago. The big thing is understanding your roots and your past and where you come from and how that plays into what you're doing today. And being able to take that knowledge and capitalize on it and roll it into other things and basically be able to adapt.
Sure.
Sure. I mean, my grandfather on my mom's side, J.O. Pierce Jr., he was always adamant with all of us grandkids, don't just take what we do here on the ranch as being the only way. If you get a chance, you go out and you day work wherever you can go, and you watch and see how other people are doing things, and you can learn better ways to do things, and you may learn how not to do some things.
Absolutely.
And don't always just rely on what we're doing here. You can bring something back with you that's going to help out. Or you may see how somebody did something over there and say, well, we darn sure don't want to do it that way.
So give us an example of that. Like even in your generation, you aren't running cracker cattle anymore, I'm sure. So definitely genetics is a big thing, or even some like pasture rotation, things like that. But y'all have, even in your generation, done some really cool stuff as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one thing that we did, and probably the most significant thing recently, was getting involved with the aquaculture company. They had some innovative technology, and they were looking for a landowner to work with to try to prove out this innovative new technology for water quality. And we went ahead and stepped up to be the guinea pigs. But I really didn't even view it so much as being a guinea pig, because from what I could see right up front, number one, they were authentic individuals that we met with. So to summarize the project really quickly before I move further with it, they basically were wanting to work out better logistics for dealing with floating aquatic vegetation removal from Lake Okeechobee. It's always been a very slow, tedious process because it takes so long to move all of that material when you harvest it with mechanical harvesters. And what they figured out was they have proprietary technology where they can take all of that floating material. The mechanical harvesters still collect the hyacinths, but they bring it to a barge where this technology is on the barge, and basically it's processed into a giant smoothie because the hyacinths are 95% water. The hyacinths are soaking up all of the nutrients out of the water that we really don't want in there, your phosphorus, your nitrates, all that sort of thing. So they're uptaking them in their root system and binding it in their tissue. So when they create this pulp product, they are then able to pump it through a hose almost as far as you want to pump it to. But in our case, it was 6 miles to get it to the ranch through hose, and then they were applying it behind a tractor at agronomic rates as a soil amendment.
That's right.
And basically what they came up with was a way to replicate what had happened traditionally before the Herbert Hoover Dike was put in place. Right. Yep. So that, that proved out to be a really great way to utilize that material that's out there on the lake and improve something for everybody in the state, while we were also getting the benefit of a soil amendment.
Absolutely. And so it sounded like there's probably some Phares engineering, Pierce engineering, or Rux engineering that was going on there to take and harvest something off the lake and make it a solution, no pun intended, the double it is, to be a solution that was a solution to a problem. And you and your ranch actually accepted that. Did you see any benefit? I know, Sam, you've told me in the past, you walked there like, oh my, these calves look different. Tell us a little bit about the difference that it made after being put on the ranch.
Well, I think we saw back to a little bit of a more uniform group of calves. I think our cows were cycling more in time with each other. Calves were a little heavier when we weaned them this year and sold them, and they looked good. And the mama cows looked good too. They didn't fall off, like sometimes they do at the end of that season when you wean them. So just visually looking at them, to me, they looked better. And we hadn't changed anything else in our management plan for our cows other than that soil amendment. And it didn't interfere with our day-to-day operation either. We were able to continue doing everything while that was going on. So it was a really, what could be a very beneficial fix for what's somewhat of a problem for everyone.
Does this look like it'll be something that could be utilized? Did it make the front page of the Miami Herald or the Palm Beach Post or whatever? Is it something that people are interested in that could be a solution?
It really gained a lot of traction. I don't think they have quite finished up with what they call the white papers, the research that's going to come out of the project, because we did this in conjunction with the University of Florida, FGCU, and then there was another independent. Well, it was sponsored by FWC and FDEP, mm-hmm. and I think they had a group working on the research and the data. But at the end of the day, there'll be 4 sets of data come out of it so that we have a comparison. But the preliminary data was enough that aquaculture got approved to expand into Lake Istapoga and also South Lake Kissimmee. So they're going to be starting those projects here very soon. And I think once they do that, there's a chance they're coming back around to Lake Okeechobee again. But as I recall, the preliminary data from what aquaculture told me, they were able to determine that if they could have 8 to 10 of those installations around the lake, at the end of a year, they could be removing more nutrients out of the lake than what's coming into it.
That's amazing.
Which is a massive deal.
That's a huge thing. A lot of folks, especially even on this broadcast, probably haven't heard of it, and this may be their first introduction to it. But there are opportunities. As you mentioned a little while ago, it's to adapt.
Yes.
And you have adapted something that is working on your ranch. And what other things have y'all done that your ranch? I mean, the longevity of it's tremendous, almost 200 years. What other things have been done to adapt and survive, to be resilient and sustainable?
Well, the other big thing to me is having to learn that you got to get off the ranch and get involved in sharing your story.
Absolutely.
And showing up at all of these meetings that nobody really wants to have to sit through, or workshops with different state agencies, because all of us in the Cattlemen's Association have kind of adopted the phrase, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu.
That's right.
And so we realized, and this goes back several generations, I got involved in FCA leadership very early on when the kids were young. And then as they got older and got involved in different athletics and one thing or another, I had to kind of step back and focus on family. And now I've gotten back into FCA leadership. But all of us realized, and I can remember way back, Wes Williamson and a few others started stressing the importance of being vocal about sharing our story. And so a lot of us that are my age and even younger realize that we've got to present what we're doing and be open. Not that anybody was ever trying to hide anything. It's just, as you know, farmers, ranchers, we're all the same. We're very humble.
That's right.
And we don't make a big deal out of talking about what we're doing on our place or anything. But then you realize at some point we have to speak up so that others can learn more about how things work, and the importance of what we're doing is for everybody in the state, the benefits that we're providing to everybody.
That's it. And it is. There's a part of the culture that we are in, especially an agrarian culture, is to not to talk out a lot, to not be vocal, to be more reserved, and to put your nose to the grindstone, stay on the farm or ranch and get your job done. And you don't boast, you don't brag. Somebody may do that for you, but you don't do that to yourself. And I think sometimes that's necessary for our survival. And you've done that. You have taken it to a very another level of involvement and promotion. And one of them is your podcast, Between the Beaches. Tell us a little bit about it.
Well, I got started listening to podcasts myself, and realized that there really weren't, at that time, there weren't that many that were ag-centric. Mm-hmm. Definitely not Florida ag-centric.
Right, sure.
And so I saw the need for something there, and that it was another avenue of storytelling. And so I basically started formulating the idea in my mind, and to help get it launched, I knew that it was something that would go hand in hand with what the Florida Cattlemen's Foundation was doing. And so I approached Jim Strickland, who was on the board, and I knew he was, like me, kind of a idea guy.
Sure.
He had no idea what a podcast was. So I explained all that to him, and he latched onto it immediately, saw the value in it, and he said, tell you what, put a proposal together for me, and I'm going to carry it to the next foundation meeting and pitch it for you, and see if we can get you sponsored to get started. And so that's how we got started, was the Florida Cattlemen's Foundation stepping up as our first sponsor, which helped me get all the equipment to get started.
Yeah.
And we hit the ground running from there.
You know, it's interesting. You know, agriculture, farmers, ranchers are less likely to talk in public. However, the public seems to like to talk about agriculture, oftentimes putting it with misunderstanding, misnomers, miseducation. How do you get a lot of response from non-ag people to your podcast? And if so, how do you handle it?
We do get a lot of response, and fortunately, it's all been very positive.
That's awesome.
And, you know, our goal with it was communicating everything that lies between the beaches. That's how I came up with the name. So, as everybody knows, the majority of our state's population is along the coast or along the I-4 corridor, and they don't realize how much ag and how much what I call old Florida is still out there in the middle of the state, and they know very little about how it works. So while, yes, we're very cattle focused with the podcast, I try to keep it to where it's about just old Florida culture and history in general. Circling back to your question about the feedback, I get, of course, you know, we always like to get reviews as podcasters,
Sure.
The ratings and so forth, but I get a ton of just direct messages through Facebook. I get direct text or calls to my phone. And then a few times, and Sam can speak to this, a few times we've been in some obscure place and somebody just comes up and realizes who I am and recognizes my voice, which that took getting used to, and will call me by name. And I'm like, who is this? So yeah, all kinds of feedback from everywhere.
Yeah, and they usually say, "Yeah, I listen to your podcast while I'm mowing, or while I'm, you know, in the tractor, or
That's right.
hauling equipment, or something like that." So
Famous Ferris is
I
there.
know,
That's it.
right?
Small town famous, yeah.
And it's neat that folks would actually tune in and find it to be something beneficial, and then keep coming back to it as well, and gives you a really good platform to promote heritage and the importance of agriculture, whether it be economic, environmental, ecological. Tremendous benefit. Brad, you don't just do the podcast. I mean, you have tremendous talent, and actually, I have two of your pieces of artwork on the wall in my office, and the thing about your paintings is the detail. Before I want to ask you about just that part of your talent and how can people find those to even see them? Here we are talking audibly. Where can they go look at that? Some of the beauty of your work.
So everything's on my website. It took me a few years to kind of cement in my mind how to coordinate everything I was doing in one place. But the website's Cow Hunters Unlimited, and I came up with that name because I'm not limited to any one avenue of storytelling.
Sure.
We're doing it through the artwork. We're doing it through the poetry and the writing, the podcast. And then we've even got the food products where those feature the artwork on the labels. And it's also got a little segment on there talking about our Florida cow hunter history in the description of the products. So everything's there at cowhuntersunlimited.com. And of course, we're on the social media outlets and Facebook and Instagram primarily. And so that's the easiest way for people to find us.
Tell us, what are some of your paintings? Just describe some of what your work is. Or should I have Sam tell us about that?
We'll give her a shot at it. That's her favorite, is always, what does your husband do?
Yeah, that's the question. More like, what doesn't he do?
That's exactly right. But tell us, what are some of those paintings? I mean, I know I got the two that I have, and I see them consistently. They're beautiful. But tell us a little bit about some of that work.
It's primarily Florida landscapes. You know, it's that between the beaches area. primarily. It's ranch scenes. It's, sometimes wildlife, people. He captures the Florida landscape like few can. You can tell that he knows what it looks like to the point that we'll be outside one evening as the sun goes down, and I'll tell him, that's, I see that light in your painting. I can see it. And having lived it the way he has lived it and seen it the way he has seen it, he has a unique ability to capture it. And so it really resonates with other people that have seen it that way as well. And he does commission pieces if someone has a photograph, but sometimes it's just something in his mind or a place that he sees it the way he thinks it would have been seen years ago. And he does the beach scenes too. He does a lot. Obviously, there's a lot of water in Florida, but he'll also do some beach scenes when asked, and they're beautiful as well.
Well, I guess that's what it is for me, is that I'm a longtime native here and been in agriculture, and I can when I look at it, I can feel that heavy air. I can just sense that to me, it's very captivating. But you don't do it just visually. You do it through word and written word as well. And you have written a book, and I have read that book. I was on an airplane and one of my travels, and I couldn't put it down. And I would say you're a very, very good writer. And there's some things that I have a tough time reading because they're tough to read. And it's not for lack of interest in the topic. It's because of the lack of literary capability. You don't lack that. It is very well written, expansive vocabulary, very well thought out, and easy to follow. Tell us a little bit about, at least I know you've written one book. I may have to go buy another one, but what else? You've written one. Tell us a little bit about it.
So I wrote the one book, which we published through Gen Z Publishing back in 2016. And I wanted something that was going to tell the history of Florida's cow culture, as well as share some of my poetry. And more than just sharing Florida's cow culture history, going a little bit deeper than what some of the other publications that have been out there for a while have done. And that's not a knock on them. They're great, and I use them as resource material all the time. But most people don't realize that if it were not for that Scots and Irish herding culture that was basically picked up from over there and brought over here and replanted. I mean, they basically took what they were doing there for generations, and when they came to this country, they just picked right up where they left off, because the landscape was very similar to what they left from, particularly in the Appalachian South and the Piedmont region, coming right on down to the Atlantic coast. All of that was very similar to what they had left from in Scotland and Ireland. And so it was perfectly suited to raising cattle. And that kind of merged with what the Spanish had brought into Florida. So they brought it to Florida first, and it started down here, was kind of dropped off a little bit. The Seminoles picked up what cattle were left behind and began herding them. But then as those Scots and Irishmen moved south into Florida, all of it kind of came together right there and really blossomed into American ranching as we know it today. And then I shouldn't say at the same time, slightly behind, you had the push coming up out of Mexico into Texas and the Southwest. And then from here, it started moving west, and everything just kind of came from the south and moved out and expanded across the country. So the book's purpose was to kind of share that warrior herder culture that came from over there and was brought here, and how we took it and more or less perfected it into American ranching today.
Notice that he said perfected it. They didn't get it right across the pond. We get it right here.
That's right. That's right.
But I tell you, if you want it, it's available on your website as well. There's the book and its title.
Celtic Cow Hunter, Florida's Cow Culture and Poetry and Prose.
That's it.
Yeah.
And it's outstanding, well written book. It's a fun one to read, and
Thank you.
encourage everybody to pick it up. But in it, you have some of your poetry as well. You mentioned that a moment ago.
I do.
And it is fun to listen to. Do you have any you'd like to share with anybody?
I can do a one or two here if
Can
you'd
I
like.
make a request?
Sure.
I like cow pens personally. That's my favorite.
All right.
Because it's generational, it's Florida, and it's Brad. I just appreciate that part of it and your ability to be able to put it down on paper. Go ahead, Brad.
Sure, I appreciate it. So this one's titled "Those Old Cow Pens," and got the idea for it just from being in the pens working, but then thinking about all the different things that we do around the pens. It's not always work getting done there. And so this one, like I said, those old cow pens. Silhouetted all alone or maybe shrouded by some trees, like the Royal Guard at Buckingham, they stand stalwart as you please. Just some poles and lumber to passers-by on the busy highway, with a rough and worn appearance of weather-beaten brown and gray. Their history shaped by work they've seen, plus sunlight, rain, and winds. Yes, sir, there's more than meets the eye within those old cow pens. They've seen it all, my friend, from soggy summers when hurricanes blew to hard-packed ground and clouds of dust when droughts have shown up too. Colts have been started there and loops from lariats have been thrown, while in between all that, old man winter's bitter wind has blown. Sweat and blood have been shed there by both livestock and men. Indeed, cattle and seasons have changed alongside those old cow pens. It's more than just a place to work some cattle that were gathered. It's also a place where family, friends, and cowhands meet and chatter. Some feed's been poured to troughs there and red whiskey into Dixie cups. Fireside breakfasts have been had there while the morning sun erupts. And boy, it sure looks pretty, reminding you to say amen as you're watching the breaking of the day around those old cow pens. That might hold weaned heifers with fresh brands burned on their hides, where kids saw their first heifer marked and it filled them up with pride. They share a family story there on those seasoned cypress boards, through brands and names outlined, inscribed by knife and underscored. A herding legacy passed on thanks to their ancestral sage cowmen, whose wisdom was handed down while kids grew up inside those old cow pens. During times when they sit empty, overgrown with weeds and silence, ain't much better place to go so as to clear your head and gain some sense. Within their warm embrace, they've seen homework done and Bibles read. They've heard prayers whispered, laughter shared, and seen many a tear be shed. More than wood, they're like a sacred hall to be visited again and again. No riches will buy the memories that abide within those old cow pens. Thank you. Thank you.
No, thank you. What were you going to share? I interrupted, and it brings tears to my eyes. I love that poem.
It's a good one.
It's a sweet
Well,
one.
I've got a newer one that I would share with you if you'd like.
Absolutely.
This one I did not too long ago, and got to pull it up on the iPad here because I don't have it. I don't commit many of them to memory because, quite honestly, I've always got so much bouncing around in my head.
I understand.
I don't have a lot of time to sit and memorize, so I do more reciting than anything. This one, I had the idea for this one probably 20 years ago. Kind of planted a seed in my head, and I may have jotted down a note or two at some point. And then, my buddy Trent Willman, it's a recording artist, now does more record production than anything else. He jokingly told me one time that some ideas just have a longer gestation period than others. And so this is one of those. But not too long ago, a fellow that I knew died in a horse wreck out there at Likes Brothers, Bill O'Grady. And that was kind of the impetus for me to go ahead and finish this thing up. So the title of this one is Heaven's Brand. The cowboy life ain't easy. There's danger around every turn, but most fellas horseback rarely give it any concern. Young cowboys live for the day. They're wild and full of fire. They give no thoughts to troubles or facing situations dire. Riding hard and chasing glory when you're racing for the lead, flying past horns and hooves of ranked cattle as they stampede. One wrong step or little slip will end your days in just a wink. In the still of the night, cowboy, do you ever stop to think? Are you wearing heaven's brand? Have you heard the master's call? Amen. Imploring you to ride for him from the heavens above us all. The Savior has a plan for you, and he wants you on his crew, tending cattle on 1,000 hills with a never-ending view. Young or old, we're all guilty of that stubborn cowboy pride. As much as any bronc will, it can bust you up inside. We try to cut our own trail, thinking we can make our way. But we're not meant to walk alone like a little doby stray. There's a haven of rest waiting when this earthly roundup's done, where the fields are evergreen and the storms never darken the sun. It's new range filled with old friends, a place to cast your worries aside. Sitting tall in the saddle, nothing but good horses to ride. Are you looking beyond today? Have you heard the master's call? Or are you just rolling the dice, willingly riding for a fall? When the final hour chimes and it's time to meet your fate, if you're wearing heaven's brand, he'll be waiting at the gate.
Amen. Amen. Thank you for that one.
That's
a precious one. You know, we'll be riding horses on the way back. If folks don't know, Revelation chapter 19, he's returning with his armies, and they're on horses. Amen. He's on a white one. That's all I know.
Yes, sir.
So years ago, Jared, my youngest, he was 3 years old, and he's riding in the back of a car on the way home from church on the evening. It was a Sunday evening. He said, Daddy, he says, does God have barns in heaven? I said, son, why would you ask that? He's 3 years old. He says, why is that? He says, well, he has horses. Amen. Well, thank you. Do you have any others you'd like to share? I tell you what, those are two precious ones.
I could do one more if you want one more.
Do one more.
Yeah.
What's your favorite, Sam?
I couldn't tell you the name of it, but it'd be the one he read at or he recited at the annual meeting
For Putnam St. John's.
about when you marry into this lovely life, you don't know everything you might get out of it.
That's the one you're after, huh?
No, you don't have to read that one.
No,
That's just the one that comes to mind.
No, it's one very fitting as you sit next to each other, and y'all are, how long y'all been married now?
It'll be 30 years in May.
30 years in May.
Yeah.
And you knew what you were signing up for.
I did.
You're looking for Ranch Wife's Bargain, right?
Yeah, that one.
Ranch Rice Bargain. This sounds like it's a good one. Actually, I've heard it before, too. This one I laughed at. I didn't cry.
All right. She never bargained for fence staples on the vanity or cow shit on the floor, colostrum in the freezer, milk replacer in the house, or penicillin in the fridge door. She never dreamed of being outside in her PJs, shivering, pointing a flashlight to help him see enough to fix the fence someone hit sometime just before midnight. She never bargained for calls at random hours about cattle on the road, though she's given thought to videoing those trips for reality TV episodes. She never expected some of the surprises she finds when washing clothes. What makes a boy stuff calf scrotum sacks in his pockets, she won't even pretend to know. And clearly, she never bargained for their contents to be supper on the table, but when it comes to changes and making adjustments, she's proved she's more than capable. She never envisioned making trips to the store would be a major ordeal, because she didn't know that home would be so far from town when negotiating their deal. She loves their life, their kids, and her cowboy, and all that's under his hat. And though she never bargained for all the cow nonsense, she's learned to love even that.
Let's say that one caused me to chuckle.
Yeah, and those are all true things. None of that was made up.
No, that was... Yeah.
Yep.
He also has one, the table, which is really good as well. That one's really good.
That's based on our dining room table.
And that one's precious too. It just the point is, you have a talent of taking real life experience and putting it into words or into visual aids to tell a story, and it is very, very encompassing, capturing, specific, detailed, and it's a talent. It's a gift. And I just appreciate you sharing that, especially with our industry that's in need of it. And our theme this year is growing agricultural forward. Growing forward is the theme for 2023, and you're doing that. I mean, you are pushing, promoting, and preserving a heritage that's fleeting. I often refer to us as an endangered species. Here we are in Florida, especially as producers. How would you, I don't know how to frame it, just encourage others to grow forward? Brad first, and then I'll come to Sam, but Brad first.
I would say the biggest thing is just being willing to make that first step to get outside of your comfort zone. It's not always easy to go out and share your story, share your heritage with other people. But what you're going to find out if you're willing to make that step and do it is you're going to find out that people love hearing it.
Yeah.
People have great faith in Florida farmers and ranchers, and they really enjoy hearing what you're doing and why. And so if you're willing to get outside your comfort zone and do a little something different and grow yourself, the rewards are there.
Awesome. Very good advice. Sam, how would you advise others to grow forward?
So what I've witnessed in my almost 2 years at Farm Bureau is the willingness of people to open their gate, to open their door, to invite outsiders, so to speak, onto their operation and to tell their story. And just as Brad said, even if you don't tell it in an eloquent manner with a wide vocabulary, when I've been on these tours, which Farm Bureau does so well at the state and local county levels, you see people change their mind when they hear someone tell their story and there's an emotional tie to what they're doing. You can spit out numbers and percentages and facts and acres and whatever all you want, but that doesn't grip people. What grips someone is when they hear your story. And that is what moves people into that group that doesn't look down on ag. I mean, we all like to eat. We all have to eat.
Yeah, absolutely.
And one of the things my grandfather always said is a nation that cannot feed itself is a weak nation.
Amen.
And if we don't open our gate, open our door, tell our story, we stand to lose some of that strength that we have in the ability to produce our own food and fiber. So, for those listeners that may not be active with their county farm bureau, join your county farm bureau. Find out how you can get involved, because you become the voice of agriculture, and people listen when farmers speak. They really do. Well,
thank you for that advice as well. But thank you both for being on this podcast today. I tell you what, it's recharged me, and I've cried, I've laughed. But you both are so precious to this industry. Both of you use your talents, but both of you put them together as a tandem. And thank y'all for sharing it today, and thank you for being with us.
Thanks for having us. We enjoyed it.
All right.
Sure did.
May God bless each. Thank you much.